Hello, and welcome to episode number 29 of Wrestlerotica, the podcast that combines wrestling and erotica. This week we have another two stories to share with you. The first story is entitled, Never Truly Yours. In this story, a jealous Kevin Nash becomes possessive about Triple H, which then leads to the two of them having a steamy session in the nearby parking lot. The second story is entitled, I Need You to Be My Hero. In this story, Steve and Amell's growing tension and rivalry with Stardust finally explodes in an unexpected way. Without further ado, let's get to this week's stories. This story is entitled, Never Truly Yours, and it was written by Archive of Our Own user, Morrigan Redblack. Kevin is so often a man who frowned more than he ever smiled. His grumpy, chuffed-out lips that matched the ever-present glare in his eyes makes him a natural menace to anyone who crosses path with the man. Add a 6-foot-plus height behemoth of a frame into the mix, and you've got an moody, angry giant at your fancy. But for the sake of general peace and personal well-being, don't piss him off. Even if you know how to. And quite frankly, it doesn't take a lot to piss him off. He can get angry about a lot of things, depending on the mood he is. But Kevin, being the man that he is, extremely protective of his clique members. He is always looking out for them and making sure that nobody messes with them. And in certain instances, he can also be, quite, possessive, despite having no actual claim of his right. Which is the reason why he is scowling at the man whom had taken sudden interest in Hunter.
It's all about the game, and how you play it, all about control.
And is engrossed in a deep conversation with him. Kevin saw the man scooting closer over to the blonde, and occasionally leaning close, too close, to Hunter, to whisper something in his ear, to which in response, Hunter would laugh and shake his head as if he found the man ridiculously humorous. Kevin would beg to differ, though. He found the entire situation less than amusing. So he stormed through the throng of the crowd and over to where Hunter was sitting. Hunter sensed him approaching and turned around to greet Kevin with a light rasp.
Hey, Kev.
He began. Let's go, Hunter. We gotta leave early tomorrow, Kevin said, reaching over to take Hunter's arm. The other man bemoaned.
Aw, come on, man. Blondie and I was just about to get started.
And he cut off by Kevin's abrupt wave of the hand, and his glare that read, plainly, Fuck off! The man grumbled something, and settled down on his stool. Kevin then turned to Hunter. Let's go.
But Kev!
Now! Kevin grabbed Hunter's arm, a little too roughly, and hauled him out of the club, and into the dark and dim-lighted parking lot, just at the back of the club. They stumbled across their rental car, and Hunter was shoved back first on the left door of the back seat.
What the hell?
He groaned. What the hell? What the fucking fuck were you doing inside there? Kevin snarled at smaller man, angry at what he'd seen. Angry at the very idea of Hunter getting intimate with another man. At that thought, his mind flashed to the scene inside the club where the man, whoever the fuck he was, getting close with Hunter. His fists balled at his sides, feeling the anger surge through his veins once again. Hunter, for his part, and a little too smugly replied, Anything that you didn't have the balls to do, Nash? Brown eyes widened, before narrowing into little black slits as he glared. Kevin is raging right now.
Yeah, let's fucking rage!
Even as he understood the not-so-subtle accusation in those words, he knew damn well what the other man meant. He knew for a fact that for all the rendezvous that they have had together, they all are but fleeting moments. Moments that meant nothing. If those moments were taken to mean something more, it would involve too much conflict, too much uncertainty. Somebody has to explain to Scott, Kid, and Sean. That's one thing. To get their acceptance is another. Compromises that neither man is willing to make had to be put on the table. Will the boys be able to look at each other again in the same way if this was to come out in the open. We are a pack. We are brotherhood. We are clique. And Hunter is right. Kevin didn't have the grapefruits to confront all those issues. Fuck that. Without much of a preamble, the bigger man reached forward and pulled Hunter into a bruising kiss. His lips and teeth gnashed, with Hunter sucking on the lower lip harshly before sweeping into crevices of the other man's cavity. He's always been so sweet and hot, like a liquid fire.
What?
Hunter wrapped his arms around the big man, who in turn hoisted him up against the car door, uncaring of the hard ridges pressing into his back. Hunter needed Kevin. He needed him. Now. Hands continued to wander on each other as the bodies rubbed together, taking both men into heightened state of lust. For all the human senses that they have, what they have now is nothing more than pleasure-riddled minds. But Hunter came to this reality first, even as Kevin was sucking a huge bruise right on the sensitive skin of his neck. Arching against him, he broke apart just a fraction of a second to address the state. Kevin, Kev, he gasped out before being roughly kissed again. His words lost in throes of teeth and tongues as Kevin's mouth plunged his once again before having the same realization himself. They were in public.
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
Shit. Kevin pulled away for a while, and the disheveled blonde whined in protest. Shut up, Hunt. I got this, he growled as he opened the backseat passenger door and shoved Hunter into the backseat of the car. The younger man wiggled around a bit to allow Kevin to crawl into the seat. It is a tight and constrained space, but it only served to trigger their excitement further. Really? Hunter managed, amused by the humor of the situation, but only for a few scant seconds before his eyes dipped closed as he felt Kevin's lips feast on his pectoral muscles, delightfully tugging, teething, and pulling the sensitive nipples. Fuck! Hunter arched as he struggled to contain his cries. Somehow, although Hunter didn't know how, both of their pants had disappeared. Torture. This is true torture. Hunter knew that for sure, as Kevin continued his assault, using his body as an instrument to trigger shocks of pleasure until he is absolutely past the point of speech and coherence. And when Kevin wrapped his hand harshly around his cock, Hunter nearly lost it, his cries reaching a near shriek, only to be muffled by Kevin's left palm as it closed over his parted mouth and inevitably causing him to struggle to breathe. And the hand on his cock didn't cease. Kevin tugged and deliberately pulled at the erect organ, teasing the writhing man underneath to the point of return, and dangerously close to breaking. No, Kevin wants Hunt to break when he claims his body. It is ruthless, almost cruel, to think of it, but he could care less. He gathered the beads of pre-cum on the head, thumb sweeping over the head of the weeping shaft, and took a moment to look at the sight beneath him. Glazed hazel eyes were unfocused as they are stared at his own. Hunter continued to pant as if he ran a marathon. His face and body is covered in sweat, the light sheen giving him a brilliant glow under the dim lights. His hair is tangled within the band, so Kevin tugged it off and watched, pleased as the curly waves flowed around his face. He looked like an angel, fallen, debauched, and to be used at Kevin's whim. Kevin didn't waste time any further, as he hushed as they could be. He'd rather make this quick, as the people could start filling out the near-empty parking lot anytime soon. He would not want to take that risk, knowing who they are and what they do. He quickly thrust 2 fingers into the tight hole of the man beneath him, sucking in quick breath as he moaned in pain and pleasure. He leaned over close to kiss Hunter again, gently this time, as he thrust in one swift motion into him, catching his cry of surprise. And he didn't wait too long for Hunter to adjust. Kevin's hips almost instantly began a furious pace, but Hunter rarely minded that. No, he didn't even give a fuck about that for all it mattered. Hell, he relished the pain just as much. He lived for wrestling, and even when there were moments where he barely made it through the difficult nights, he still wanted to feel the pain. It makes him feel alive, real, and pushes him to the brink where the line between sanity and insanity does not exist, that he could lose control and just break apart, and no one would ever question him. As Kevin rode him expertly, Hunter's hands scrambled for purchase, desperate to hold on to something. He shut his eyes tight and cried out louder than before, not really caring if they can be heard. He had too much to worry already. He just won't let go tonight. Grabbing onto the big man's shoulder, he crushed his own body to Kevin's, wanting to get lost in the heat of the other man's essence, to feel wanton, helpless, and completely vulnerable. No one made him feel that way better than Kevin. It is a fact that rings with conviction in his head, even now. A fact that is strengthened even more with each upward stroke of the cock inside him, hitting hard against his sweet spot and taking Hunter into a high that is better than any Black Label or weed could ever give him. He was never a fan of those, anyway. Kevin, though, was not too far gone, like the man underneath him, but he knows he could not hold out any longer. Between the tightness encased around his cock, the small space between them, and the friction of their sweat-slicked bodies rubbing against each other, Kevin is about to erupt any moment, and Hunter's keening noises didn't make it any easier. Oof! Kev! Hunter's muffled shriek signaled the end. His warm seed splashed against his own abdomen, and Kevin's, as Kevin, with one hand over Hunter's mouth, and the other hand harshly tugged at the moist cock that dripped with Hunter's seed. His relentless pounding didn't stop, and Hunter came, once again, nearly sobbing as his body became too sensitive to be touched. Kevin looked at the mess beneath him. Hunter stared at him with pleading eyes, his sweaty, heaving body and his perfect stomach covered with his cum. That image is all that it took to push him over the edge, growling harshly as he released deep inside Hunter. They laid there for a while, waiting for their bodies to come down from the blissful high that they shared in their minds, to come back to the reality. Hunter spoke first, his voice scratchy from all the screams he'd made a few moments ago.
I can't believe you just fucked me in a parking lot.
I could care less where we were. I wanted you, and I didn't give a flying fuck about anything else. Kevin whispered back, stroking Hunter's sweat-slicked hair gently as he kissed his skin, the supple flesh of his neck, as if to soothe the still heaving body. He tethered more kisses on his face and held him close. The warm and gentle embrace was completely different from their earlier coupling, which was animalistic and primal.
You got no right, Kev.
You know that? Hunter retorted, albeit softly. He hated to remind Kevin of what they are and what they will ever be. It hurts him just as bad as it hurt Kevin. Kevin sighed and said nothing, pulling the smaller man close to engulf him in a warm hug. They stayed like that for a little longer before Kevin moved out of the car, pulled on his pants, and walked away. Leaving Hunter behind in the car. If there were any tears on his face that night, Hunter would have credited them to a good fuck in his own sweat. And nothing else. No one else. The end. This story is entitled, I Need You to Be My Hero, and it is written by fanfiction.net user CrazyCollectionDuck.
Oh, shucky, ducky, quack, quack.
That cosmic nut job belonged in a fucking straitjacket, Stephen Amell thought, as he raked his hands over his head, yanking off his black baseball cap and spiking it before he resumed his pacing in the dark, deserted parking lot. Stardust! God! He was too angry to even drive. Triple H had yelled at him as though this whole mess was somehow his fucking fault, like he had no right to defend himself. Amell knew it was due to the fact that his actions would only solidify the lunatic's delusions, but right now he didn't really care. And the fact remained, Stardust just got under Amell's skin. It had started as some sort of ridiculous Twitter war he hadn't taken too seriously, but then he'd gone to a show. Stardust had pranced down the ramp and leapt up onto the barrier as he'd seen him do so many times on TV. But seeing the weirdo in person had sent a strange shiver up his spine. It had irked him a little that while the dude had spent his free time pestering him via social media, when he knew he was right here, just 10 feet away, he ignored him. Steven's irritation seemed even more ludicrous when the other man acknowledged his presence by hissing at him, causing irritation to morph into anger. Steven had gotten to his feet and stared the strange man down, then let him know that he wasn't one to be trifled with lightly. As if it wasn't all unsettling enough, he had the nerve to call him out, and in the weirdest way possible, saying things like, "bound to attract," and "our futures go hand in hand." It was almost more than he could take, really. But the dude was seriously delusional, so he had tried to let it slide, though not with a whole lot of grace. Coming to the show had really been asking for trouble. And Steven knew that. Stardust truly believed he was Oliver Queen. "I need you to be my hero," he had said. And Amell remembered his words, had sent that strange shiver up his spine once again. Stardust's obsession with him was disconcerting. But what really worried him was he had just become obsessed as well, which was probably why he'd come to the show in the first place. As soon as he saw Stardust come out, his pulse had begun racing, and his skin had tingled when the strange being had approached him. Steven had been unsettled and jumbled before the spark that accompanied Stardust's touch when he shoved him, and that had been what really sent him over the edge, or the barrier, as it were. Before he knew it, Amell found himself in the ring, being pulled off of what he had become to think of as his arch nemesis. His anger had gotten the best of him, and as soon as he realized it, he held up his hands to let those that were holding him back know he was good. He wasn't really good, but he had a handle on himself again. Then Triple H began berating him, putting him on the defensive, before he demanded a match, hoping to settle this whole mess once and for all. Amell had been pissed when JBL had said,
Stephen Amell came here looking for a fight.
That had really gotten to him. He was a fan, had always been a fan, and this was hardly his first show. Just because the cosmic lunatic couldn't separate out fantasy from reality didn't mean he had come here looking for a fight. Yet, as he paced in the parking lot, suddenly he wasn't too sure about that. Right now, Stephen Amell wanted nothing more than to get his hands on Stardust, and his anger faded slightly as a small smile graced his lips. SummerSlam. Amell had promised he wouldn't disappoint, and though he was sore as fuck, he smiled to himself, feeling as though he kept his word. Neville had been an amazing partner. Amell could not have asked for better, and while Steven had taken his lumps, it was more than worth it to make that ridiculous face paint and contact-wearing cosmic crazy eat his words. Though, the look of devastation Stardust wore after all was said and done had caused an uncomfortable pain. Amell replayed the events of the match in his head as he rinsed off, and the hot water beat down on his back. But his mind kept flashing back to what it felt like to have Stardust's hands on his body. It had been way more trying than he expected. Not that he didn't already know the WWE superstars and divas trained and worked ridiculously hard. But he was no slouch himself, and while he knew the match was going to be painful and grueling, he had no idea it was going to be so intense. Almost too intense. Even as the blows stung, which was evident by his many welts and bruises, they felt almost good. It was more unsettling than the brief contact had been when Stardust had shoved him, and he hadn't really recalled even jumping into the ring after that. But he knew he wouldn't soon forget Stardust's arms wrapped around his waist. Even that first shove had left his head spinning. The hot water had been helping relax his sore muscles. but the thought of Stardust's hands on his body had been enough to give him goosebumps and cause his cock to begin to harden. Already being naked was not helping the situation, and as unsettling as it was, he was alone, so he could take care of the situation without too much embarrassment. It wouldn't be the first time since the nut job had come barreling into his life. While he considered Stardust his arch nemesis, which was disconcerting enough, he could no longer deny that the strange man had a powerful effect on him and had become an obsession of his own of sorts. He not only drove him crazy at all hours mentally, but he drove his body crazy as well. It was the most disconcerting part about the whole fucking mess. Amell fisted his now fully erect cock slowly, stroking himself as the hot water cascaded down his body. He closed his eyes, envisioning his arch nemesis, and imagined the sexy noises that would emit from him as he fucked him thoroughly. His ass was probably tight, so tight and warm. It would feel perfect wrapped around his cock. A gasp of pleasure escaped him as he increased his pace, stroking faster, tightening his grip, trying to bring himself to climax. As an actual moan escaped him, he was suddenly jerked out of his fantasy when he heard the locker room door bang open. It wasn't like he'd been caught in the actual act, but it was enough to make his cheeks heat, though he was puzzled as to who the hell it could be. With an irritable sigh, he resigned himself to be uncomfortable for a while, as he shut off the water, wrapping a towel around his waist. Once his throbbing cock softened enough as not to give away what he'd been up to, he entered the main part of the locker room, scowling a little. What he found made the blood rush straight back to his recently softened cock, making him have to shift slightly to hide it. Stardust had redone his ridiculous face paint, and while it was a little shocking to see him in jeans and a t-shirt, what had really registered with Amell was the fire in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Amell snapped at the strange being, who was simply watching him from where he was leaning on the wall by the door. The lack of response unnerved him slightly. Yet, not as much as the fire in his eyes that registered, even with the context giving Amell the fleeting idea that Stardust not only knew what he had just been doing, but what he had been thinking about. Somehow, that only made him all the more hard, causing him to have to turn his back to him. "This is far from over, hero," Stardust hissed in his ear, suddenly causing chills to break out across his flesh, as he felt the other man's warm breath breeze across his flesh as he rummaged through his gym bag. Amell stiffened in more ways than one, with Stardust's sudden closeness simultaneously wondering how and when he got so close without alerting him. "I believe it is," Amell replied, trying to shake off the effects of the bizarre being's presence. "The whole world just watched me pound your ass."
This is all one big ass blast.
He inwardly chastened himself for his poor choice of words, as it brought back the images from his shower fantasy, causing his cock to become rock hard once again. "Oh no, hero." Stardust's voice was quiet, but still managed to intensify his chills. "This won't be over until you embrace who you truly are. The cosmos have spoken, Oliver Queen." "Dude, I am not really Oliver Queen or the Green Arrow." Amell knew his words would probably be met with anger, but he needed to get this man to go away before he tore his clothes off and made his shower fantasy a reality. "Just like you're not really Stardust." "Oh, but I am." Stardust chuckled softly as Amell felt his warm breath on the back of his neck, causing another shiver to run up his spine, despite his surprise at the other's reaction. "It's all a state of mind, Oliver." "No," Amell responded a little irritably due to his now almost painfully hard cock. "I am Stephen Amell. You are Cody Rhodes. End of discussion. I need you to be my hero, Oliver Queen."
Let me be your hero.
Stardust whispered, leaning in farther, so his muscular chest was resting against Amell's back, causing that familiar, unsettling spark. But what really got to him was the remarkable hardness he felt firmly pressed into his ass. "Be my hero." Amell couldn't stop himself if he wanted to, as warm breath caused him to visibly shudder before he spun around and captured Stardust's lips with his own, effectively cutting him off. Amell had thought their match was intense, yet still that was nothing compared to the way his body burned now. It wasn't gentle or loving, it was a clash of teeth and tongue. Amell pulled Stardust flush against his body, letting out a satisfied moan when Stardust's impressive hardness ground against his own, as they fought for control of the searing lip lock. Amell released his towel and felt it fall in a heap around his feet, as he sucked the other man's bottom lip into his mouth, getting a much sexier whimper than anything he had imagined. The noises that emanated from Stardust made his cock throb as he slipped his hands between them, undoing the button and zipper of the other man's jeans. Amell's mouth actually watered when his nemesis' impressive length sprang free as jeans and briefs were pushed down and kicked aside before the other man's shirt disappeared just as quickly. Amell quickly reclaimed Stardust's lips, simultaneously fisting his cock as he shoved his back against the bay of lockers, causing them both release modified grasps into one another's mouth before they began battling once again. He stroked the other man none too gently, but judging by the moan it elicited, it was perfect as he suckled on the sensitive flesh of his neck, relishing in the slightly salty taste. Just as Amell began to trail kisses down the other man's collarbone, he suddenly found himself being spun around and his back pinned to the bay of lockers, with his nemesis nipping and sucking a trail down to his cock. It felt so fucking good, better than he had imagined, but was absolutely mind-blowing after teasing kisses were planted on the sensitive flesh of his inner thighs. Stardust forcefully sucked his swollen throbbing member into his mouth. The back of Amell's head bounced off the lockers as the other man immediately deep-throated him, massaging his balls with a hand, not restraining his hips. "You have a sweet fucking mouth." Amell's voice was deep and husky as he gripped the back of the other man's head, pushing more of him into his mouth as he bobbed his head. "You fuck!" Anything else that he wanted to say was lost in what would have been an embarrassingly loud moan had he not been completely wrapped up in watching the other man's head bob, and he hollowed his cheeks and began sucking in earnest. Soon, too soon, fire coiled in Amell's belly, and while he wanted to come, he wanted to make a shower fantasy a reality. He pulled Stardust to his feet roughly, before covering his mouth with his own tasting himself, as he plunged his tongue into the other man's mouth before he once again panned his back to the bay of lockers. His nemesis' hips bucked, begging for delicious friction, as he quickly made a trail of nips and kisses towards his destination. Amell didn't even bother to tease as he lapped the salty precum from his slit, getting the sexiest moan he'd ever heard, before wrapping his lips around Stardust's cock, taking a cue from the other man, doing its best to take all of him into his mouth at once. Amell licked and sucked, getting almost more pleasure out of the bizarre but sexy noises escaping his nemesis as he did getting his cock sucked. He reached up, pressing his finger to Stardust's lips, who promptly sucked them into his mouth, coating them in saliva. Amell moaned with his mouth still full of cock as he slid his index finger into the other man's tight pucker. He had been right. He was tight and warm, and was going to feel so damn good wrapped around his cock. He crooked his finger, hitting the sensitive bundle of nerves, causing Stardust to buck his hips and fuck his mouth, hitting the back of his throat with the head of his cock. Amell pulled back when the other man's thrust became more erratic, smirking as the other man hissed his discontent. But Amell paid him no mind as he pushed off his knees before spinning Stardust around, who immediately stuck his sexy, plump ass out, looking over his shoulder at him, just begging to be fucked thoroughly. Without further ceremony, he used his finger to spread his precum over the head off of his cock before pushing it into Stardust's tight entrance, struggling to hold back as not to hurt him too much. A drawn-out moan accompanied his progress until he was balls deep. He gave the other man as much time as he could manage to adjust to him before he started moving. His most erotic fantasies came nowhere near to how fucking good it felt to be buried in Stardust's tight heat. Amell watched his nemesis' ass bounce in the sexiest way possible as he thrust in and out of him. He could tell it felt just amazing for the other man as it did for him as he pushed back into him, begging for more. Soon he didn't even have to move anymore as Stardust began to impel himself on his cock. Amell felt that sweet, familiar fire begin to build in his belly, and he reached around, fisting Stardust's cock, resizing control as he continued to pound into his ass and stroke him in time with his thrust. He was sure anyone walking by could hear them, but he didn't care, as Stardust cried out when his seed spilled over Amell's hand. And moments later, Amell bent down on the other man's shoulder, stifling his own cry, as his balls tightened and he came harder than he ever had in his life. Amell slid out of Stardust and spun him around, reclaiming his lips in a sloppy kiss, as they both struggled to catch their breath, before leading him over to the shower to wash off the evidence of their recent activities and the ridiculous face paint that had become smeared all over both of them. It was a strange but almost peaceful feeling as they took turns washing each other in a comfortable, exhausted silence. Once they were cleaned and dressed, Amell wasn't exactly sure what to say, especially once his nemesis pulled his shirt over his head before turning to face him wearing a cocky smirk. While Stardust sent chills up his spine, what he was looking at now wasn't Stardust. It was Cody Rhodes, and Cody Rhodes made his heart flutter. Aww. Thanks for being my hero. After a moment and a sudden hiss, Cody Rhodes was gone, and Stardust was back. With that parting gesture, his nemesis abruptly turned and walked away. Amell was acutely aware it was just as Stardust claimed when this whole situation began to unfold. This was far from over. The thought made Stephen Amell smile. The end. Thank you for listening to episode number 29 of Wrestlerotica. We hope that you enjoyed this week's stories. As always, if you enjoyed this week's stories, please be sure to like and review us on iTunes. Also, be sure to visit us on our other social media sites, including Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter, as well as our official website, WrestleRoticapod.com. Thank you, and have a good week.